Hey, it's Becky from Patchwork Posse, and today we are going to make a super cute and simple, kind of a quilt as you go hot pad. And it has a pocket as well as a little hanger to a hanger loop, so you can hang it up in your kitchen. This is a great project for using your scraps and practicing binding on a small project. The first thing we're going to do is gather all of our materials. So I've got all my parts here. You're going to need a long rectangle and a piece of batting for this. And then I've got 2 pieces of batting for the main body of the hot pad, as well as our piece for the backside and strips that we are going to sew on here and make this kind of a quilt as you go project. The first thing we're going to do is put together our pocket area. So what I have done is taken my long piece, I've folded it in half, and I've given it a good press with the iron. And with my with my smaller piece of batting, I am just going to stick this right in here and fold this right on top. I'm going to make sure that the top of the batting goes right to that fold because we want to make sure we're stitching it down. So I am going to take this over to the machine and stitch this right along the top edge to give it a nice finished edge for the pocket. With this finished, I'm just going to set it aside. So as you can see, I've got the folded edge and then I've got the stitch line right across the top. And that actually is going through the batting as well, so it's securing that in place. So the next thing we're going to do is put together wrong sides facing up our square. We're going to place our batting right on top of this. And now we are going to start with our strips of fabric. So these are about 8.5 inches wide, so this is the same as the square. I'm going to just place one I think I might just go up a little bit, so the next one I sew on will hit all across the top. And what I'm going to do is just put right sides together and take this over to the machine and stitch this all the way across here. So I can put some pins in here to secure all the layers together. I don't want this to shift when I'm sewing it, so just make sure that everything is secure. If you want, you could use a basting spray as well. So now I'm going to take this over and stitch across this. So what's going to happen is once we put a stitch across this edge, there will also be a stitch across on the back side. So this is the quilt as you go technique. So when we are finished sewing, it will be also quilted. All right, so I've got this first piece sewn down. I'm going to flip this up and give this a good press. Now, if you wanted, you could take this back to the machine and you can stitch on either side of this seam just to give it an additional quilted look. It's not necessarily needed, but if you wanted to, you totally could. So the next step is to grab a second piece and we are going to just put this in place, again pinning it so it doesn't shift, then taking it over to the machine and stitching all the layers down again. All right, I've got it sewn down. So as you can see on this side, we've got our first stitch and our second stitch line. And I'm going to do this one more time because I still have some space at the top. So let's pin this in place and then stitch all the layers together. All right, we have everything stitched and ready to continue on. So the next thing we're going to do is just trim this up because I've got the extra strips coming out and then I do have, it's just off a little bit, so I'm just going to use my ruler and square this up. All right, with it all trimmed, we are ready for our next step. So I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to do the same thing. So as you can see, I can see a little bit of the batting on the one side. All right, now with this, I am going to place this, put this in place. Now this is going to be our pocket. And this is going to be the hot pad part, and I've got it cute. It's quilted on this side, so super cute. I've got a solid piece on this side, and then I do have my pocket as well. Now what we do need is a little hanging loop, and so this is super simple. You can just grab some leftover ribbon from another project you have. Right, so our last step is going to be binding this. And so it is a traditional binding, and we are just going to run around the edge and add our binding. What I am going to do as well is put in place and pin this. I'm going to stitch this down prior to getting my binding started, so it's in place and won't shift when I move it. So I'm going to pin this in place. I'm going to run this over to the machine and just stitch this down really quick. All right, with that in place, I can go ahead, put my pocket in place, and what I'm going to do is begin adding this binding to the hot pad. This is just a traditional bind. It's 2.5 inches cut. I don't want to start or stop my binding at the top here. I'm just going to start it on the bottom. So I am going to put this into position, and I am going to pin this down and stitch all the way around the whole hot pad. It is thick. You might have to go slow, change your stitch length if you need. Now that I have the binding sewn on all the sides of the hot pad, you'll want to take it to the ironing board and press everything out. So when you flip it over and start pulling it to the front, it is really going to, it'll be okay coming over to the top. Now this is really thick. There's a lot of layers here, and so if you find that you are really struggling with it coming over, it's way too bulky, then I would suggest trimming back some of these layers just a little bit. Now we're just going to fold this over to the top, and we are going to start clipping this in place and take this over to the machine and stitch all of this binding down. When it comes to the corners, you'll want to just pull one up so it's flat, and then you can pull this other side down, and it should make this mitered corner. And then just, all right, so this is what I've done. I took this over to the sewing machine and I folded over the binding. When I hit the corners, they miter really nicely. And then on the front, you can see just a little stitch right before the binding. If you want, you can use matching thread. I just went ahead and used white. It's a super quick project, so I wasn't too worried about being matchy-matchy or perfect. And then for the ribbon tie, it was folded down, so I pulled it up, and then I did a stitch line right in the center of the binding. You can choose to do it at the top or whatever, but that is all finished.